We are now talking to co-founder of Pros and Joe's Charity League, Eric Romoff. What's going on, Eric?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I was doing research on our guest that we haven't spoken to in 2 years. Didn't know that you were coming on, so I didn't know much about you. I haven't checked anything on some of the stuff that you do. So why don't you tell the fans a little bit about the charity work that you do for Pros and Joe's, and obviously the fantasy football stuff that you've been doing over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so Pros with Joe's is a charity fantasy football league. There are many of them out there. They are all doing great work and supporting wonderful causes. What's different about ours is that every single team that's participating is a set of co-managers. We have a pro, a fantasy professional, or an industry professional, and a Joe, someone who specifically donated to that pro's charity. They're entered into a sweepstakes. Whoever wins that sweepstakes gets to co-manage that team along with the pro that they donated for in an expert league. So we're heading to our third year of doing it. We've had right about 50 teams or 50 pairings participate each year so far, raised just under $20,000 over the last 2 years for a variety of different causes. So really cool way to get to interact with the fantasy community, to potentially kind of get to ride shotgun with a fantasy expert that you know and trust, and to raise some money for a number of good causes.
Eric, what kind of pros that you have come play your games? Well, obviously, you probably have some music artists or maybe some basketball players or football players. Give us some of the names that have actually played in your charity event.
Yeah, so our structure is a bit more focused on the fantasy space. So the pros that we're referring to are people like Dave Richard or Matt Harmon, Adam Rank or Marcus Grant from NFL Network. So really the people that have kind of led the way and the more recognizable names in the fantasy content creation space. Those are a few examples. We've got a pretty diverse crowd of fantasy experts that participate as our Joes. So people that started their own thing and they're a couple years in, to people that are on NFL Network and ESPN every single Sunday.
So have you looked into potentially looking at athletes as well? Because I know a lot of them play fantasy football. I know there's that whole argument with the baseball players now, Jock Peterson and Mike Trout and all them on what is that? Is that kind of the next step for you? You want to get more in terms of expanding beyond the fantasy community? What do you think is your trajectory with that?
I think that would be really cool. I may or may not be in Jock Peterson's DMs right now. Seize on the moment of that very public fight.
We are talking to co-founders of Pros and Joe's Charity League, Eric Romoff.
Hey, Eric, what kind of charities do you normally deal with? Do you have charities coming to you, getting in on the fantasy action? Because I've seen nothing's made more money than some of these fantasy football leagues or some of these fantasy sports leagues. And how many charities are you involved with? And do they come to you, or do you have to go out and ask them?
Yeah, so it's actually neither. So one of the wrinkles of our format is that the industry pro, the fantasy expert that is participating, gets to choose what charity they're supporting. So as opposed to it all going to a singular cause or a couple of causes, it actually goes to support an organization that is near and dear to their heart. So, I mean, we've supported and raised money for all of the big ones, right? American Cancer Foundation, Red Cross, all the names that you typically think of, all the way down to like super localized stuff, right? Helping, homeless populations in a particular city, helping save and rehabilitate injured wildlife in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right? So it's been one of the cool parts of this experience for me, is really just getting to see all the different types of organizations out there. And while there are so many different things that they're all working to support, the thing that is universal about all of them that's truly incredible is they do an amazing job of stretching a dollar, right? They can get $2 in their hands and make something really good come out of it. And that's been the case across the board. So been really interesting to see it all come together.
I think that's really interesting because you have so many different things that could happen within a community. And then if you can make it that specific, there's so many people out there that need help, so many people hurting, so many people, so many causes that are coming out of COVID that I think this, to me, is that's a great way to do it. So congratulations.
As everybody knows, we are
Yep.
talking to co-founder of Pros and Joe's Charity League, Eric Romoff. Eric, why don't we get into some football conversation? We've seen a change in the NFL, especially in the AFC this offseason. A lot of the great quarterbacks from the NFC are starting to move to the AFC. Some of the better defensive players, a.k.a. teams, and we can name some players. One beast of a man from Chicago is now playing for the Chargers now, as everybody knows. So what has been the most interesting and more impressive thing that you've seen so far this offseason in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me has just been the evolution of the wide receiver market, right? We think about to when free agency first opened up and Christian Kirk signed that
Ridiculous.
gigantic contract with Jacksonville, and it was kind of a punchline. And come to find out, what really happened is he entirely reset the wide receiver market, right? Now wide receivers are expecting to be paid as one of, if not, the highest contract on their respective teams. And it's kind of created some chaos around the NFL, right? You see names being traded that previously would be untouchable. You see guys that were, not that long ago, fairly happy with their situation. Now, all of a sudden, holding out of OTAs or wanting to restructure their agreement. Literally in, a 24-hour window, our understanding of the value of this position in the NFL completely flipped on its head.
Yeah, it was thought of for a while. There were so many analysts saying, "Oh, the wide receiver doesn't matter. You don't need it to win Super Bowls." Meanwhile, that was only the Patriots. So, two big names that got traded: Davante Adams and Tyreek Hill. Their fantasy value now being on new teams. Where do you stand on it? We've had a lot of analysts, especially, say that they're worried about Tyreek Hill in particular. Davante Adams, we'll see with McDaniel's offense. Where do you stand on those two?
Yeah, It's hard to say, right? Like both of these guys were at their previous position and with their previous team, the elite among wide receivers. So to expect that to carry forward, with so many variables, not necessarily the most realistic outcome, but in terms of what is reasonable to expect this year and years to come, I think they're still going to be very much so premier at their position, right? We're not going to see nearly as many deep shots to Tyreek Hill coming from Tua Tagavailoa as we saw coming from the arm of Patrick Mahomes. But, you look at the back half of this Kansas City season last year, and as a response to the too high shell that they were facing defensively, they pretty much moved to a very quick pass, kind of underneath, over the middle offense. And Tyreek Hill was able to be just fine, still be a very productive wide receiver one from a fantasy perspective. So I think we see him get to pretty similar production, but kind of through a different means in Miami. In terms of Davante Adams moving over to the now Las Vegas Raiders, the biggest question there is really Josh McDaniels coming in. You look at his history as an offensive coordinator. Generally speaking, what they try to do is get the ball out very quickly to the primary target. So as long as that history holds true, I think that leads to a very heavy workload for Davante Adams. Obviously, Derek Carr is not Aaron Rodgers, but he's certainly a capable NFL quarterback. So if Davante Adams is getting a huge workload of targets coming from Derek Carr, I think we can also see him finish inside that top 12 at the position pretty readily.
Tyreek Hill might be not getting the arm strength of Patrick Mahomes, but he's getting the quote-unquote accuracy that he thinks Tua apparently has more of.
Well, Mahomes was really pissed off for everything that Hill has said about the accuracy of Tua. I don't know how anybody thinks that Tua has a better accurate arm than Patrick Mahomes, except maybe Tyreek Hill. Maybe Tyreek was drinking when he said it, or on his podcast, or maybe he just thinks that saying this is going to bring more press to him. But for him to take, and I don't think Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. I never thought he was. You still have Aaron Rodgers there, who's won back-to-back MVPs, and you still have Tom Brady there. And as long as those two guys are there, Patrick Mahomes isn't the best quarterback in the league. I don't know if he will be by the time that happens, because you got guys like, a guy that played in the Super Bowl last year that looked pretty damn good. And you have a guy right now like Justin Herbert who has an unbelievable team around him, defensively, offensively. I think the Chargers are going to make a run for the Super Bowl this year. They look really, really good on paper.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about this Chargers team as it was last year, and then they go out and add a guy like Khalil Mack, and they pretty much nailed their draft a couple months ago. In
J.C.
April.
Jackson too. Don't forget about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly a fun, maybe not so dark horse to throw a future onto.
Eric, you look at here in New York, a lot has been made of the Jets being a popular pick in Vegas. I think one guy put $5,000 on it, 200-1 for them to make the Super Bowl. What team do you see as being a sleeper that could maybe make a run like the Bengals did last year in the NFL?
I think the first thing that's important to do is to put into context what the Bengals did last year, right? Like the absolute bottom of their division, last or near the bottom in a number of different statistical categories the year prior, to then turn that around into a Super Bowl run the year later is almost unprecedented at the NFL level. So I don't think we're going to see a team like the Jets make their way to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, for that guy that put down 5 large on that. But there are some teams that I think are kind of in that middle of the pack that can potentially offer some value from a betting perspective. Denver is a team that I really like. I think their price is interesting, and it very much so reflects the difficulty of their division. But if they happen to make it out of that division, if they happen to sneak in as a wild card, you'll be very happy looking at 20-ish to 1, depending on your book of choice.